Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff with Fluent American checking in today, and today I'm going to be focusing on vocab. There's a number of words that I need to learn, and really this is going to help me, but it's also going to help you too because you can see the strategy that I'm going to use when I'm trying to learn new words. Now you can see I do have the chat open in the bottom corner, so if you guys have questions for me as I go through this, I'll be definitely checking in on the chat periodically. So definitely let me know. Concerns about English, pronunciation, life, anything, be sure to let me know and I'll be happy to check that as we go through this. So again, the words that I'm going to be looking up, so these are all words that have come up in conversation with my son, who's like 2.5 years old. I'm trying to just speak with him in Italian, but every now and then there's a word that you need that maybe you don't have at the moment or that you're trying to remember more consistently. Hey, son, thanks for joining us. Again, if you have questions as we go through this, let me know. So these are the words that I'm going to be trying to remember, and we may or may not have time to go through all of them today, but I would also say if there's some words in English that you're trying to study, I would say grab a sheet of paper or make your own document. Oh, Sita, great to have you. By the way, Sita, I'm going to need to message me because you have been invited to the Telegram group on behalf of our last winner. Oh, and Rana's here too. Everyone's here. Great. Yes, like I said, this is going to be about learning new vocab. So if you guys are trying to learn new vocab, you can learn some words on your own with me. But these are the words I'm going to be focusing on, starting with the noun, drain. Okay, so when I'm learning vocab, usually I like to do this on paper, but for our purposes today, we're making a digital version. Okay, and what I think you'll find is that if you use this strategy for learning vocab, you may have seen this in some of our other videos, I think that you're going to actually remember words for a longer period of time, because the key to vocabulary is associations. The more associations you have with a word, the harder it is to forget. So we're going to be looking up a couple different things. We're going to be trying to find a definition. So I'm going to be looking up a definition of our word, which may or may not be necessary depending on how well you know it. Also some other things. We're going to be looking for some example sentences. Using like a dictionary is fine. Also, the internet is also helpful too. Okay, so some example sentences. Other things too. Common expressions. So basically, a key thing to remember with vocab is that words don't appear by themselves. Okay, words appear in groups with like 2 or 3 other words around them. So trying to find some of those common situations so that way you, again, have a better idea of when to use those words or what words to pair them with. So we'll be looking at some common expressions. And then lastly, and most importantly, draw a picture. And I know lots of my students say, but Jeff, I'm not an artist. I hate drawing. I'm not good at it. And you don't need to be. Okay, this is all about just trying to build another association. When you're drawing a picture, your mind has to work because it needs to think of the word in a new situation in a different way. Okay, so that's why that picture aspect is super important to helping with retention. Okay, so let's I'm gonna erase this middle word. We're trying to find, so we're gonna go. Let's open up a new tab. I'll make this big. My favorite dictionary site is Word Reference, personally. It's just wordreference.com. And again, I'm looking for a drain. And it's one of those words that like I remember it, then I forget it, then I remember it, then I forget it. Oh yeah, cause son, we the U.S. just did daylight savings time, so now it's an hour earlier. So it'll be like this until like October or whenever. So yeah, daylight savings time. It's Some people like it, some people don't like it. It is what it is. But yeah, scarico, tubo di scarico. Okay, so I'm gonna write that because I want to remember this. Tubo di scarico. Okay, so I have my word and definition. For definitions, I think it's really good to try to just stick with your target language. So I'm just going to switch this to just Italian. Okay. Tubo di scarico. Sounds happy about the news, about the time. And instead of saying, I like this advice about, yeah, drawing a picture, it just makes such a big difference. You know, if you can find a visual for your word, if you can find like an audio cue for your word, if you can think of a taste, if you think of a smell, you know, the more associations you have with a word, the harder it's going to be to forget it. It's going to make your vocab learning process just so much easier. Okay? Dun, dun, dun. Deflusso di acque. I like that. So deflusso di acque. Perfect. Deflusso di acque. Okay. Now, you may be wondering, okay, so how do we find common expressions? In this case, if you have access to Google, Google really is going to be your best friend. Google is a super powerful tool, especially for doing what we call like corpus research. If you're not sure what a corpus is basically just a huge amount of text, lots and lots of text from like conversations, dialogue, text messages, all kinds of things. Okay. And what corpus-based research lets you do is it lets you see how frequently something appears, how often something appears in language. And yeah, I mean, Google is a search engine, but it's also a huge like research tool for you in terms of corpus. It just has access to millions, if not billions, of different uses of language. Okay. So we want to try to find different situations that use this. Okay. So this kind of looks like the drain pipe. Another helpful too, as well as like looking at kind of the image search on Google too, just to kind of see the things you want. Okay, so like it looks like the tubo di scarico, like it's gonna be like the, especially like the drain pipe specifically. So the key thing for me, especially for today's word, is especially going to be like the scarico part, which makes sense. Okay. So I could just work with that. Okay. And one thing I'm saying, okay, so we're looking at especially like car parts too. So it looks like I could also use this with exhaust. In English, this would be like your exhaust pipe, your tailpipe, as well, which is fine because it can also be used for gases, which makes sense. How about this one? So look, come pulire lo scarico. How to clean your drain. That sounds like a pretty useful phrase. So that might actually be one I use, like. Pulire lo scarico. Okay, and sorry, what it has to do is my handwriting. It's certainly not the best. And also you may get some background noise of my son. Okay, we can also see another picture here. I might actually use this. Oh, look at this. Also, prevenire uno scarico intasato. So that may be another one. Prevenire, prevent. Uno scarico. So already, just by using the Google image search, I'm already getting phrases that I think could be helpful, that could be good to know. It's like prevenire something, or pulire, to clean. So preventing, cleaning, things like that. Intasato. Great. Okay, so I can also use this, of course, too, for finding example sentences. And you're going to notice that when I did it in Google, I put parentheses around it. Okay, and what the parentheses do is they tell Google, find this exact phrase. Okay, so for instance, if I type in what I found earlier, it's like, prevenire. Okay, so I put this in, and I put it in quotes. So now what Google's going to do is going to search all the sites, all the text that it has to just find this phrase. Okay, so a super useful tool for just kind of narrowing your searches. Okay. So let's see if we can find a quick one. Oh, look, we get another phrase too. Uno scarico ostruito. Ostruito. So I'm going to write that one down as well. That sounds good to me. Okay, so again, I'm just by doing some quick Google search, 2-3 minutes, I'm getting lots of words that I think are going to be really helpful for me. Okay. And just for the sake of time, I'm not going to write the sentence, the full sentence, but this could also be something, when you're looking for example sentences, you could write some of these completely as well in your example sentences. When you're thinking of example sentences for vocab, you want to use examples from native speakers. You don't want to make your own. That's one of the I remember when I was doing more teaching in like schools and things, I know a lot of teachers for vocabulary classes, they tell their students, okay, now go home and write some sentences using the words. And from a language learning perspective, that's really not the best activity. So if you're a language teacher by chance watching this, those types of activities aren't the most useful for vocabulary learning, because students those noises make the lesson more active. Yeah, it's an organic class. We're doing it on the moment. I appreciate that, son. If you're a language teacher, really try to avoid using those types of activities in class where you tell students to just make up their own sentences with words. You can do that eventually, but that shouldn't be one of the first activities, because students just don't have enough context with the word and they're more likely to make mistakes, which can also lead to some false understandings or some misunderstandings. Much better instead to tell students, okay, now that you have the word, I want you to find 3, 4, 5 example sentences where that word appears. Okay, and that's going to be much more helpful, because then you're getting a more natural context, a more natural use of the word. Okay. So when I say example sentences, a big thing here is do not make up your own. Try to find them. If you get really stuck, you can use a dictionary. Okay, if you really have a hard time finding them, use a dictionary, but really don't just make up your own sentences. Try to find ones from native speakers. Okay, and again, like we said too, the most important part is the image. One image that, if you aren't really sure what to draw, maybe it would be helpful to, again, Google's going to be super helpful for that too, because you can get inspiration from the images here. I mean, even just looking at these, so I can see there's a sink here, there's a drain here. So I could just pick one of those. Okay. So for instance, let's say I want to draw this one right here, the one in the middle. Okay, so I can just draw. And again, it doesn't have to be pretty. It just needs to get the job done. Okay. So we got a lot of little dots. And again, it doesn't have to make sense to anyone but you. Okay, you don't need to be an artist. It just needs to make sense to you. Okay, because as soon as you see the picture, you're gonna remember the context of it. Like, oh yeah, I remember when I needed to make that drawing. Okay, I would say for your drawing, 1 to 2 minutes max. You don't want to spend an hour on it. Just something really quick. Okay, but yeah, so this would be an example of a flashcard that I would make. And again, I would really recommend doing this on paper. I'm doing it on on this program, or to kind of just show you guys and also kind of learn a bit on my own. But I think it would be more helpful on paper because, again, that's a whole other association. You know, holding the pencil or the pen you're using, touching the paper. These are things that, again, to your mind, just help build even more and more associations. Okay. But yeah, so this gives you a quick example. So that's one for me. Let me pick another word that we can take a look at. I'm going to jump to the bottom. So like a tortilla chip, stealing from Spanish. So I was like, I don't know how Italians say tortilla chip. I know they say chip. But I don't know. Patatina di tortilla. I don't know what they would say. So let's find out together. And again, kind of starting off the same way. And again, if you're making your own vocab words, let me know what words you're trying to study. And things like that. We can kind of do this together. Let's all learn at the same time, right? I'm going to switch it back. Another thing too, usually when learning language, I really suggest trying to just use your target language as much as possible. So it's easier if you're taking a word from your target language and then trying to get a definition for it. I think in some ways that's a little bit easier than if you're thinking of a word in your own language and trying to translate it. Let's see if I can find anything. Okay, so they're suggesting this. Sfogliatine di mais. Sfogliatine di mais. Let's just double check. I just want to make sure that this could be a thing. Because they only had one thing for me. Sfogliatine di mais. Nachos fatti in casa. Look at that. This is actually something that this looks like exactly what my wife just made for lunch for looks just like what my wife made for my son today for lunch. They're eating right now. So we see patatina di mais, which is really interesting, right? Because patatina, your root word is potato. So it's like potato chips of corn. Like corn potato chips. But regardless, I feel like there was another. So it looks to me like there could be two potential words here. So that's kind of, when you're doing this type of vocab thing, it's up to you to what you want to use. You can try to see what's more common. This is another way that Google is super helpful. This is a way to see if the words you're using, not if they're correct or if they're wrong, but if they're at least common, is you can use the results feature. Okay, so I can see, so for instance, Sfogliatine di mais got 593,000 hits. Okay. And if I change, let's see if I change it to patatine. Patatine di mais got way more, right? Like 2 million hits. Okay. And something that you can also do to double check too is, again, go back and put quotes around it just to double check and be sure. So see, now that's going to reduce us to 23,000. And let's see what I get for patatina di mais. I'm still getting more. Okay. I'm personally, when I'm doing this one, I'm probably going to write both just because sfogliatine for me is new. But I'm going to make a note that, okay, patatina is more common. Okay. So I'm going to write sfogliatine. Or again, patatine. And then di mais. Okay, so like I said, this is a relevant word for me. This is what my wife made for lunch for my son. Okay. And let's just see, I'm curious about one thing we mentioned again, common expressions and things like that. Let's kind of see what kind of words are common with this. And look, another thing that's helpful with Google, I promise you, I'm not being paid by Google, but for language learning, like, Google's one of your best tools that, like, no one talks about. You can do so much research. Just look at all the things I'm getting it. Okay, so for instance, patatine di mais al forno. So that could be something. So my common expressions. I'm just going to write patatine di mais al forno. Al forno. Okay, so that's going to be, looks like it's a pretty common expression. Another way that you can kind of check yourself too is just kind of see, just kind of add letters. So for instance, if I add an A, look, I get a lot of al forno. How about with B? I don't know what B is. You can kind of just see. Okay. Fatte in casa. Okay. Indeed. So I'm just exploring, I'm just della cucina messicana. So look, I'm just seeing all different possibilities. If there are phrases and things that I think are common, then maybe I can take a look at that. Okay, so for instance, tiene mais e formaggio. E formaggio. Okay, so I like that one. What was the other one? Fatto di casa, no? Fatte in casa. Patatine di mais fatte in casa. Okay, so I'm writing that down. Let's see if we can find maybe one or two more. Ooh, how about here? Per imballaggio. Imballaggio I'm not as familiar with. Okay, so that's a whole other thing too. When you're doing this, you find other words and things like that you're looking for. So it's interesting. So it's like so I'm also learning. Okay, so patatine. It looks like it can also be something used for like when you need to ship something, right? To like protect it and keep things safe. Yeah, interesting. So that means now I'm really curious, and this is the joys, but also maybe the frustrations of this is that you can kind of get in a hole of just kind of like one thing leads to another thing, leads to another thing, so then you what should take like 5 minutes ends up taking like an hour. So maybe like no. And you can also, play around with phrases and see if they work or not. Yeah. Okay, so I wasn't expecting to find things like this. I mean, I could write a whole new vocab word just on patatine for like shipping and protecting goods. Because that wasn't what I was expecting. But that's, again, the joys of language learning, right? Anyways, I wanted to find some sentences. And sometimes if you find that it's hard to write sentences, then I would suggest going to later pages in the Google search, because you might be able to find things more easily. That looks like a good sentence to me. Like patatine di mais. So P D M. Sono uno spuntino. Yeah, so try to find a sentence that you think is interesting that maybe can also teach you other vocab. So for instance, for me, the spuntino part's a little bit new. And then a base di mais. Okay, and again, definition, you can just find a definition. If you feel comfortable with the word, maybe you can skip it, but in general, I would include it. I'm going to skip it just for the sake of time. And of course, the fun part is drawing a picture. So, I feel like a chip. Oh, maybe like this probably gives some good inspiration here. So we can see there's a basket, but I especially like the salsa. So usually you use these things with salsa, right? So maybe drawing a little bowl. with some salsa and draw a little triangle. Okay, so there's my quick little picture of my bowl of salsa and a little chip going in there. Yeah. So yeah, so I was able to make 2 quick cards. So again, with the Scarico, look at that, I can remember the word. And also the Patatina di Mais, which that's actually kind of what I had been calling them anyway, so that worked out in a lot of ways. Sfogliatina I wasn't as familiar with, but Patatina, good. Okay, so again, use this. I think this is a great strategy. What I think you're going to find when you do this strategy and learning vocab is I think you're going to find that it's going to take you longer to make your flashcard. Okay, I won't deny that. It's going to take you 2, 3, 4 minutes to make the card, maybe longer. Okay, but what I think you're also going to find, though, is that you're going to spend less time studying vocabulary and like constantly forgetting it. I think you're going to remember the words more actively. One of the first cards that I made for this was before my son was born. It was for the word acero, which means like maple. It's a type of tree. And I'll be honest, I made that card once. I made the card, I drew a leaf, I found an example sentence, I did all that stuff. And I never looked at the card again. I just made it once, and I was able to remember it. And I have similar stories for several other words that I was studying at the time. And I've tried other things. I've tried like the vocabulary textbooks. I've tried the lists and things like that. One of my issues with vocab lists, or like if you take like a vocabulary class, they'll give you a textbook and they'll have the exercises in the textbook. But those words I just forget, and my students would forget. And I think the big issue with those types of exercises is there's no context. Okay, you don't really understand why you're studying those words. Someone told you to study them, or someone else made this list for you to study. And that's really difficult, to remember it, because if your brain doesn't see any value with it or doesn't understand why it's learning it, it's going to have a harder time remembering it. Whereas if you're taking words that you encounter in daily life, so for instance here, these are all words that I've just happened upon just again in talking to my son. So they're words that are important to me. They're important because they're, I was trying to communicate an idea with my son, and it took me a second. They have a lot more value to me too. And again, that's a whole other association. So if you take vocabulary classes, or you're looking back in your language classes and you're like, oh yeah, I hated vocabulary. I always forget words. I have a horrible memory. I don't think that you have a horrible memory. Well, it could be that you have a horrible memory, but I don't think that's the main cause. I think the real cause is that the context probably wasn't the most conducive. It makes it difficult. So Rana's asking, so what's the best way to memorize medical and legal terms? And that's actually what I was just thinking about too, just having friends that are in like the medical fields and things like that. Obviously, you're often preparing for exams, right? And those exams are asking you for like hundreds, if not thousands of different terms that you need to memorize. And what I think what you see with a lot of medical students is, you study for the test, and then the minute the test is done, you forget everything because you need to study for the next test. And I think that's an indication that your mind hasn't associated a lot of value with it. So you want to try, if you're studying, in the legal field, like for law school, or if you're studying in the medical field, or if you're just studying languages, you want to try your best to get the words to have some sort of significance for you. One way to do that is, again, through this strategy. Again, depending on the medical term, like, drawing a picture, trying to find some example sentences, and things like that as best you can. Trying to, some other things too, is maybe like record yourself saying the definition too, because then that will at least will give you another association. You'll have the association with making the recording. You'll have the association also with listening to recording, and then you'll also have the association with also making the flashcard. Okay, And Roz mentioned this for interpretation. Oh God, I would, I would never want to interpret for legal or medical things. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine doing that. Kudos to you, Rana. That's you're a better person than me. I can't imagine doing that. Yeah, I would say really, go slow when first learning new words. You know, take the time to really understand it well. Make the flashcard. Again, maybe make an audio recording too, because I think that the more work that you put in at the start when learning vocab, the less work you need to put in later on. Your mind needs to understand that what you're learning is important to you. Okay, if you're only making a quick flashcard or something like that, it's your mind's gonna be like, oh, this isn't really that vital to me. Another thing too for I've seen lots of people in the medical community using is like Anki, making their own flashcards there. There's also a website like memorize.com, which is a very similar type program. And I think those can work, but I like the flashcard model more because I think it's more active. So I would definitely recommend that. Yeah, and you know, this isn't just for language learning or, you know, vocab. This can be for anything. It could be for different concepts, different formula, or things like that. Anything you're learning, if you can find ways to incorporate like an image and a sound and a smell and things like that, I think all those things will make a big difference, have an impact. All right, I do need to run soon. I'm taking a quick look. Hello, Mabrur. Thank you, Mabrur. I don't think I'm saying that right, but thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Sita also asks, when you use the word, we're trying to memorize a sentence, easy to remember. I think, you know, again, this mentioned having the example sentence there, and I think that's really key. Again, finding an example sentence from a native speaker. I really can't emphasize this enough. If you don't have time to make this full flashcard, then I would at least try to do two things. I would at least try to find an example sentence, and I would at least try to draw a picture. The example sentence is to at least give you a clue. And then I think that the picture is to give you association. Son is asking about adjectives. Adjectives is the most difficult part of English, especially I think if you're interested in reading like fiction or reading novels or things like that. I would certainly agree. How can you improve that? I would start off by, you know, I totally understand that. Start off with like books for kids or young adults, fairy tales, other things like children's stories. I would also suggest if you're looking for something more mature than that, like there's a brand of writing called like young adult fiction, which I think is really helpful. I really suggest stories that have pictures associated with them too. Children's stories are super complicated. The vocabulary that you see in fairy tales and children's stories is it is not simple stuff. And they're also the key to there are words that native speakers know. Okay, so you know you're getting language that it's the first language that native speakers are learning, but that is often among the last words that people learning a language pick up. So, you know, if you're an adult and you're thinking, oh, I've studied English for years, I don't need fairy tales and things like that. But, you know, you're finding things like, for instance, like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter too difficult, you know, then I think scaling down to like things like a children's story or a fable or a fairy tale are really helpful. But yeah, if you do feel like you feel pretty comfortable with that type of vocab, young adult fiction, another area that would be really helpful for vocab and adjectives and things like that, poetry. Especially like if you're not used to poetry, I would start with haiku. Haiku is a very short form. It's 3 lines. We can take a look at a quick example. I know some other people have asked questions too, and I will be there. Famous haiku poet in English, Basho. I think that Haiku can be really helpful as well. I think they're a good introduction to poetry if you're not used to poetry, and then you can kind of expand from there. But poetry is going to be helpful because look at this. Like, so we have this haiku here. It's like an owner of an old thatched hut. Look at that thatched hut. Immediately, like, what's a thatched hut? What's thatched? It's like thatched is like when you have like old grass that you kind of string together and things like that. Or another one. Remains of warrior's dreams. How about like untouched? That's great. Something that's like preserved. Also, for instance, for like nature vocab too, like for instance, like a cicada, which is a type of insect. You know, you're asking a person who's very interested in poetry, but I think poetry is a great way to learn vocabulary without being as frustrated as like reading a book. You know, you read a book, like a fiction, a novel, you're looking at what, 100, 200, 300 pages, right? A poem is just like 1 page, 2 page very often. So if you're looking for descriptive language to get more natural with that, I really recommend poetry. And if you're looking for poets, I can also give some recommendations. People like Basho. For more contemporary people, there's like Ellen Bass, Ellen Bryant Voigt. If you're looking for like really advanced English level poetry, nowadays there's like Carl Phillips or Gregory Pardlow. If you're looking for longer or poems they're pretty advanced. You know, there are even some native speakers that struggle with that vocab. Other questions. So you asked me, do I know Youglish? Yep. For those of you who don't know Youglish is a super helpful tool for pronunciation. Basically what it does is it's like we use Google a lot today. Youglish is going to do a similar type of thing where it's just going to scan like YouTube videos. And it's cool because you can choose what accent you're looking for. So for instance, if you're looking for an American accent, a British accent, or Australian one, you can decide. But let's say, for instance, we mentioned thatched earlier. Let's even see what comes up with thatched. And obviously not a whole lot of hits, but like 121 hits. So then they immediately show you a clip of a video that uses thatched, and then you can keep on looking. Look, thatched roofs. Okay, thatched watermelon. Thatch, and then obviously I didn't turn on the audio for my screen, but you can hear them pronounce the word. So you can hear different people pronouncing the same word. So that's super helpful. Brewer asks, how many words do you need to speak like a native speaker? Wow. You know, native speaker is a term that obviously we use a lot in the industry, but it's a really hard term because no two people have the exact same vocabulary or use language the exact same way. You know, that's even though yes, we have people that learn a language as a first language, you know, the way I use English is different than the way a lot of other people use English. So some people get by on a smaller vocabulary than others. The general idea I think you hear a lot with languages is that if you to be able to function pretty well in most daily conversations, you need about 2,000 words is the minimum. Okay. Obviously there's lots of people that have more than that. Obviously there's also people that have less than that and are still able to function well. You know, some people have a very low linguistic competency, like their language level is low, but they have a very high communicative competency. Like they're very good at gesturing, or they're very good at body language or like facial expressions. So they can really convey their meaning easily, even if they don't have the words. And in some ways, you know, having a high level of communicative competency can actually hurt your linguistic competency because people understand what you're saying, even if what you're saying isn't correct or precise. But to go back to the question, I would say, I think a general answer for your question is at least 2,000 words to get started. A similar question to that, how many different words do native speakers use during the day. I mean, I think this is true for most language groups. The most common and the most frequently used words, it's not like a super long list, you know. The vocabulary that your full vocabulary is used very rarely. You can probably get by on maybe like a tenth of the words. That's why some people really only study like the most common words that they see. I don't have an exact answer. I don't know what the research says on how many words a native speaker uses during the day. But I imagine it's not a huge number. You could probably, for like, again, just kind of like daily tasks, you could probably get by on 500 to 1,000 words pretty comfortably. Would be my guess. But again, it also kind of depends on who you're talking to, what types of conversations you're discussing, and things like that. Yeah, it's a good question, but not one I have a concrete answer for. I'll stay on for another couple minutes in case other people have questions. But yeah, this was a video that kind of started off just going over. This is a selfish video. This is me just trying to learn some vocabulary I need with my son. But hopefully you're able to also get some helpful tips and suggestions for learning vocab on your own as well. I think this process, Son clarifies for you, like, how many words do I use during the day? It's a again, it's I don't know, like a 1,000 unique words. I don't know. Is that a fair guess? I would also ask, think about yourself in your own native language. How many unique words do you feel like you're using? In some ways, I may not be the best person to ask because my job is to talk to students from all over the world. So we're discussing a whole range of different topics, right? But then I guess conversely, I'm spending also most of the day with my son because I take care of him during the day, except on weekends. So naturally, my language is a bit limited by that. But yeah, I imagine that for a lot of people, 1,000 unique words probably enough to get by every day. Okay, but again, to start considering yourself more native-like and more natural sounding, maybe 2,000 is a good goal to aim for. Remember, asked, what's the best source to learn English slang? Just a quick note on slang. So slang is going to be non-count. Okay, it's not going to be slangs. It's just going to be slang. So what's the best way to learn slang? What type of slang you trying to learn? It's slang is something that is entirely dependent on context and population and communities and things like that. Different groups are going to have different words and vocabulary. So for instance, if you're trying to learn slang that like 20-year-olds use, that's going to be different than trying to learn slang that people in, academia use, right? Or slang that even teenagers use. Like a lot changes depending on age group. If I went into a high school, they're using all kinds of expressions and things I've never heard of. And this is, I imagine, true in most languages. So I would say for slang, try to identify what type of slang you're looking for. So for instance, if you just want to understand better what you're seeing in movies and things like that, I would say try to identify a specific movie with slang that you're interested in. Also be aware, slang is something that changes a lot over time. So the slang you learn now may not be super helpful for you in 10, 20 years from now. Okay, it moves very quickly. In fact, even like 5 years, right? Like it's constantly changing. So I would say try to identify a specific community whose slang you're interested in, and then trying to listen to as much as possible. Again, obviously TV shows are going to be helpful for that, but also again young adult literature, even again poetry, especially from that community, is often using that same vocabulary. So I would start off by paying attention to the movies and media that's centered on that population, and trying to expose myself to it as much as possible. And you want to write down new words and expressions you want to use. And then you want to kind of do what we did today. You want to make flashcards and things like that to study it. Because that's my approach for slang. Rana writes, living in Canada, my goal is to be fluent, not to let poor remember taking extra steps in life and work. You know, I think there's a lot that's important in that. Unfortunately, when people hear accents, it does change other people's behavior. Okay, it's an unfortunate reality, and that's part of the reason why I do a lot of work with pronunciation, is because some people attack me because they say, you want to change people's pronunciation. And well, no, I don't want to change people's pronunciation, but I want people to feel more comfortable and welcome speaking in a new language. And for a lot of people, accent, even if you have great vocabulary, you have great grammar, but for a lot of people, accent is something that still gets them treated differently. And also other aspects of that related as well. I definitely understand that goal of, not just wanting to be good at English, but wanting to be great at any language. I totally get that desire. Sun comment says, hard to learn slang and idioms. Yeah, because it's like a whole other, it's almost like learning a dialect, right? It's a completely different way of speaking. Again, I think if that's something you're really, really interested in, then I really think identifying the type of community whose language you're trying to imitate or you'd like to learn, really focusing on that community, again, watching movies, listening to them as much as possible. And again, when you're listening, you need to be active. You need to take notes. You need to write things down. Because if you're just like, the worst is like people who you say you want to study English, so you put on your headphones and you watch a movie and you think, oh yeah, I want to, I'm look at me, I'm studying listening. And the reality is, yeah, you're studying listening, but the way you're doing it isn't the most efficient. You have to be active. You have to take notes. You have to write down words. I know it's work, but if the goal is to learn faster, it makes a big difference. Someone asked if Bird's picture is their eye. I didn't even think that, but now I'm curious. Now I want to know. Yep. So guys, I do have to get ready for my next class. If you have other questions or comments related to vocabulary, be sure to let me know. Even if I can't respond to you now in this video, I'd be happy to try to get to it in our replying to comments and things like that. I remember clarifying about one of the question. An American said, "Go bananas," which is similar to meaning like, yeah, like go crazy or like go wild, or like to a certain degree it can mean like do what you want to do. Like it's fine if you do what you want to do. And also a clarification, it's not their eye. Great. The biggest question we had today was whether or not that was a picture of my brewer's eye. Yeah. And of course, if you hear some expressions, you can always, of course, reply in the comments as well. And I'll be happy to respond and let you know. Most people, of course, are already familiar with it. But if there is a term that you're looking up and you're just having a hard time, Urban Dictionary is a website that's full of slang. Now, you need to be careful with Urban Dictionary because there's also tons of just made up expressions that no one actually uses. But as a general resource, it can be helpful for learning more about slang and things like that. Cool. All right. Thank you guys so much for your time. I always appreciate it. It's great to spend a little bit of my Saturday with you. If you enjoy our daylight savings time schedule, so we're a little hour earlier for lots of different countries in the world. Although if you're in Europe, you'll be catching up to us, next week or something like that. I hope you guys have a good day, have a good night, and a good afternoon. I will see you in our next video, which will be coming out tomorrow. Thank you guys. I will see you later. Take care. Bye.